Tonight we drift into the candlelit streets of ancient Rome, where luxury and filth, desire and disgust, twine together in ways that make even modern scandals look tame. You begin with the quiet sound of sandals on stone. The streets of Rome at dusk are not silent, not entirely. There's the faint rumble of carts, the cries of street vendors still trying to sell their olives, their figs, their stale bread before the last customers retreat home. But as you walk, the city has that golden glow of an evening that promises mischief. Shadows stretch across marble columns, voices soften, torches begin to flicker into life. And here you are, in a place where dignity and decadence hold hands like nervous lovers. Rome, the empire of law, discipline, and civilization, or at least that's what they wrote on their monuments. You don't have to walk far before you see the other side. A different Rome, one built not just on marble, but on sweat, indulgence, and habits that would horrify your grandmother. Or maybe delight her. Grandmothers are complicated. You probably won't make it through this day without cringing at least 3 times. Consider that your cheeky warning. Before we sink too far into the wine-soaked bedsheets of antiquity, I'll gently remind you to like this story, to subscribe if you haven't already, and, because I'm curious, comment your location and your local time below. It's oddly comforting to know whether you're hearing this in the quiet of midnight in London, or at 4 in the afternoon in Delhi, pretending you're working. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. Take a breath. Picture a torch guttering in the twilight. Smell the faint tang of smoke, of spilled wine, of too many bodies living too close together. The empire's reputation might sparkle in history books, but its private life? Less sparkle, more grime. So Rome and its sexual habits. You might imagine silk sheets, decadent banquets, and impossibly handsome statues come to life. And sometimes, yes, there was that. But more often, the reality was sticky floors, questionable hygiene, and practices that even Romans occasionally wrinkled their noses at. Take, for example, the Roman bathhouse, not a bedroom, but in many ways an extension of it. These spaces were communal, crowded, and for many, an entry point into arrangements that weren't exactly about soap and sponges. The baths were filled with steam, gossip, and the occasional quick encounter tucked behind a column. A major historical fact. The Thermae were not only social centers, they were the great equalizers of Rome. A senator might bathe beside a freedman, a soldier beside a merchant. Theoretically, all were welcome, and in practice, all sorts of things happened there. And tucked within that steamy haze, one odd tidbit. The strigil, that curved piece of bronze used to scrape oil and sweat off your skin. Imagine sharing that tool with dozens of strangers before slipping into the pool. Not the most intimate, sensual accessory when you think about it. But still, for some, the scraping ritual had its erotic overtones. To be slick with oil, then scraped clean, was considered attractive, like the ancient Roman version of exfoliation, though with much more body odor. Historians still debate whether Roman bathhouses were truly centers of wild sexual activity, or whether that's just gossip written by moralizing senators who wanted to tisk-tisk everyone younger and livelier than themselves. Either way, the baths blur the line between cleanliness and carnality. You might call it hygienic foreplay if you're feeling generous. Now, leave the baths for the street outside. The city is buzzing. Lanterns hang from doorways. Voices rise in laughter. The air smells faintly of roasting chestnuts and sewage. A surprisingly romantic pairing if you don't think too hard about it. Couples sneak off, hands brushing, robes swishing. Others lean in doorways, calling out invitations, selling not fruit or bread, but themselves. Rome was alive with sex, commerce, and a lack of shame that feels almost alien compared to certain prim eras that came later. And yet, amid the indulgence, the Romans themselves often joked about how absurdly messy their own desires could be. After all, when you cram hundreds of thousands of people into a stone labyrinth with communal toilets, you have to laugh about something. So here you are, walking these streets, caught between admiration and unease. Rome's greatness, it seems, rested on pillars carved of both virtue and vice. And as the night deepens, the city will show you stranger things still. You wake with the sound of a distant lute, or perhaps it's just someone badly plucking at a harp. Morning in Rome is noisy, bright, and bustling. Market stalls creak open, bakers carry loaves still hot from the oven, and everywhere you turn, there's someone with a grin that's half invitation, half calculation. You wander into a villa, someone's grand house, not yours, but in Rome the line between public and private was thinner than you'd think. The atrium is wide, light streaming down through the open roof. Slaves sweep the mosaic floors, and the mistress of the house glides by in her tunic, pretending not to notice the slave boy she favors standing very close. This is the world of Roman domestic life, where sex was not just personal but political. A major historical fact: Roman marriage was often less about romance and more about alliances, property, and producing heirs. Love, if it happened, was a bonus. Fidelity, though expected of wives, was not demanded with equal rigor from men. And that uneven balance shaped everything from bedroom customs to public scandal. One obscure tidbit: Romans had a habit of engraving erotic graffiti on their walls. In Pompeii, preserved under volcanic ash, you can still see crude little sketches and equally crude little jokes scratched onto tavern walls. Some are surprisingly funny, some are just concerning. But all of them remind you that Roman sexual culture was often closer to bathroom graffiti than lofty poetry. And in truth, the two often overlapped. Imagine Virgil writing epics while some cheeky drunk scrawled stick figures below. Now, here's where the discomfort sets in. Many Roman practices were rooted in domination, power, and hierarchy. To be the one in control was noble. To be controlled was shameful. That logic bled into their sexual world, too. Pleasure wasn't a democratic act, it was structured, ranked, and judged. And yes, it led to customs that make your skin crawl today. Historians still debate whether elite Roman men truly lived in constant excess, or whether tales of wild orgies were exaggerations written centuries later by scandal-hungry biographers. What we do know is that the boundary between indulgence and humiliation was paper-thin. As you move through this villa, you glimpse paintings, frescoes bright with color. Here's a couple entwined, there's a god chasing a mortal, and in one corner, a scene so absurd you almost laugh. Priapus, the god with an exaggerated feature that was painted again and again, more comic than erotic. He guarded gardens, weighing his, well, you can imagine. Humor and sex were inseparable here. To Romans, even the most intimate acts could be material for jokes and art. Step back outside. The sun is higher now, the streets hotter, noisier. You pass a public latrine, a row of stone seats lined up side by side with no privacy. People sit, chat, conduct business. Someone probably flirts, because of course they do. Imagine Tinder, but with very bad smells and marble benches. Rome doesn't blush. That's what makes it both fascinating and a little overwhelming. You feel the press of its contradictions, the grandeur of temples rising above, the grime of alleyways below, the constant hum of bodies and desires colliding. And as you walk, you can't shake the feeling that the Romans lived without pause, filling their days and nights with more excess than comfort, more spectacle than tenderness. Maybe that's what makes their habits so unforgettable. They embraced what many later cultures tried to hide. Tonight, the city will show you more. But for now, the day belongs to the market, the villa, the graffiti on the walls that whisper truths the poets never dared to write aloud. The day is long in Rome. The sun climbs, and so do the voices of the marketplace. You drift past stalls where figs spill out of wicker baskets, where honey drips slow and sticky, where fish lie not so fresh on stone slabs, their scent announcing itself long before your nose gets too close. And in the middle of it all, the people. Women with baskets balancing on their heads, slaves darting between errands, and men who lean against columns making commentary on, well, just about everything. Rome is not a city that keeps its opinions to itself, especially when it comes to sex. Here, desire is not whispered behind doors but joked about openly in taverns, performed on stage, and written into plays that everyone, from the senator to the street sweeper, could enjoy. A major historical fact: the Romans had entire festivals devoted to loosening inhibitions. The Floralia, for example, was dedicated to the goddess Flora. It was a spring festival full of dancing, flowers, and performances that leaned heavily toward the erotic. Sometimes actresses stripped, sometimes men performed outrageous gestures, and always the crowds laughed and joined in. Sexuality in this context wasn't just private, it was a civic act, a form of entertainment, and occasionally a religious duty. One obscure tidbit that would make you raise an eyebrow: during certain festivals, goats or hares were released into the crowds, and the people had to chase them. Why? Symbolism, fertility, and probably because someone thought it would be funny to watch half-drunk citizens scrambling after livestock while the gods looked on. Romans loved a spectacle, even when it was ridiculous. Historians still debate whether these performances were genuinely scandalous or simply exaggerated by later moralists. What is certain is that Roman religion and Roman sexuality were deeply intertwined. To honor a god was to embrace life's fertility, and that included laughter, lust, and acts that would make a modern priest faint. As you step out of the marketplace, you find yourself near a theater. The seats curve in wide stone arcs, the stage bright with painted backdrops. The actors are masked, their gestures big and exaggerated, their jokes uncomfortably personal. Here, the sexual habits of Rome become comedy. Someone mimes a lusty old man, someone else a clever courtesan. The audience howls. If you've ever sat through a sitcom that went on too long, congratulations, you've just experienced a Roman comedy. By now, you're noticing something. In Rome, sex isn't hidden in shadows. It's painted on walls, celebrated in festivals, acted out on stage. To them, the line between the sacred, the silly, and the sensual was a thin one. You wander away as the play ends, the crowd spilling into the streets again. The sun is lower now, golden light pouring across marble statues. Priapus makes another appearance, this time in a tiny shrine near a garden. Flowers are draped across his ridiculous form, offerings placed at his feet. You pause, amused and a little bemused, realizing that for Romans, even the gods could be bawdy. And so the day winds toward evening again, the air cooling, torches ready to be lit. Rome feels restless, eager for nightfall. You can almost hear the whispers of what's to come, carried on the smoky breeze. Night has fallen. You're back in the city streets, only now they glow with flickering torchlight. Shadows stretch long, laughter grows louder, and behind certain doors, the business of pleasure is fully underway. You step into one of the more notorious parts of the city. Taverns here aren't just for wine. Some double as brothels. They're upstairs rooms filled with carved beds and faded frescoes that leave little to the imagination. Here's your historical fact for the evening. Prostitution was legal in Rome. Entire districts were known for it, and brothels weren't shy about advertising their services. In Pompeii, some of those brothels still stand, walls painted with frescoes illustrating what menu options, shall we say, were available. A Roman diner could pick a dish, a Roman client could pick a position. And the strange tidbit? Prostitutes in Rome sometimes dyed their hair yellow to stand out, using wigs or strange mixtures of herbs and chemicals. It was a sort of ancient branding. Before neon signs and Instagram filters, you had saffron wigs. Historians still debate whether brothels were the central hubs of Roman nightlife, or whether much of the sexual trade happened in more private, informal spaces. Either way, the brothel was normalized. No hidden alleyways of shame. Just another part of city life, as ordinary as the bakery or the butcher's stall. You linger for a moment at a door where laughter spills out, mingled with the clink of cups. The frescoes inside glow warm in the torchlight. Some are surprisingly artful. Others look like they were painted by someone in a terrible rush. But all of them speak to a city where intimacy was as much commodity as connection. As you step back into the street, you catch sight of a couple whispering in a doorway, of musicians tuning their lyres, of children darting past before they're called back home. The city thrums with life, with appetite, with contradictions. Rome is always larger than you expect. Larger in scale, larger in excess, larger in what it demands you to accept. Somewhere above, in a grand villa, an aristocrat reclines at dinner, toying with grapes while dancers perform nearby. Down here in the streets, a freedwoman bargains for bread, while her lover waits impatiently. The layers of Rome overlap, one indulgence stacked on another. And as the night deepens, you feel it again. That sense that this city is always watching itself, half in amusement, half in judgment. Rome is proud of its order and law, yet endlessly tolerant of its mess. And in that mess, sexual, social, and spiritual, it built an empire that somehow endures in memory, if not in practice. The torches burn low, the streets grow quieter, and you, caught between fascination and fatigue, find yourself wondering what tomorrow will bring. In Rome, it could be anything: laughter, scandal, or the kind of detail that makes you grateful for the privacy of modern life. The morning in Rome is never quite silent. Even before dawn, you hear the creak of wooden carts, the slap of sandals on paving stones, the low murmur of voices carrying through narrow alleys. By the time the sun has climbed over the tiled rooftops, the city feels fully awake, like a giant creature stretching its limbs. And today, your wandering takes you not into the theaters or the markets, but into the private homes where Romans carried their secrets and their strange habits with them. Step carefully, because Roman houses are deceptive. From the street, they look plain, with small doorways and few windows. But once you enter, the atrium opens like a lung, light streaming through the central hole in the roof, reflecting in the shallow pool below. Frescoes cover the walls, and some of them, well, they wouldn't be appropriate for your grandmother's living room. Scenes of lovers, gods entwined, mortals caught in acts that were equal parts heroic and hilariously awkward. Here's your historical fact. Roman wall art was not prudish. In Pompeii and Herculaneum, archaeologists uncovered houses where the bedrooms were decorated with erotic frescoes, some depicting positions lifted straight from the Kama Sutra. Guests, servants, and children would have walked past them daily. For the Romans, sexuality wasn't a shameful corner of life. It was woven directly into the plaster. And the weird tidbit for you: some Romans believed that hanging amulets shaped like male genitalia above doorways would bring good luck. These fascina, that's the plural. Fascinating, isn't it? Were everywhere. On jewelry, on lamps, even as little wind chimes dangling in the breeze. Imagine living in a world where your neighbor's front porch decor consisted of bronze anatomy jingling cheerfully as you walked by. Historians still debate whether Romans viewed these objects as purely humorous, protective charms, or if they carried deeper religious significance. The truth may be somewhere in between, half joke, half superstition, all Roman. You wander further into one of these houses, following the sound of laughter. In the triclinium, the dining room, guests recline on couches, nibbling on olives, sipping watered wine, and swapping stories that grow more scandalous as the cups empty. Dinner parties in Rome weren't just about food. They were theaters of intimacy, where conversation drifted into territory modern polite company might prefer to avoid. One guest tells a tale of an emperor's excess. Another makes a joke at the expense of his wife's lover. The room erupts in laughter. You smile politely, pretending not to be the outsider you are. And yet, beneath the humor, you sense a truth. In Rome, personal life was never entirely personal. Who you loved, who you lay with, who you avoided, it was all political, all gossip, all performance. You slip away, back into the atrium, where the afternoon light slants golden across the pool. A servant sprinkles fresh flowers on the water. The house seems calm again, almost innocent, as though the walls haven't heard every joke, every confession, every whispered detail of the night before. But they have, and they will hold those whispers for centuries, waiting for archaeologists and for you to listen in. Evening again. You wander further, this time toward the edges of the city, where the great public baths dominate the skyline. If Roman houses told one version of the story, the baths tell another. Imagine a vast hall filled with steam, marble pools reflecting torchlight, voices echoing off domed ceilings. The baths were not just for cleaning yourself. They were the social hubs of the empire, where men, and in some cases women, bathed, exercised, ate, debated, and yes, sometimes indulged in things best left vague. Here's your historical fact. The Roman baths often included small side rooms where prostitutes or companions offered their services. Bathhouses weren't just about hygiene, they were about indulgence in every sense. The boundaries between cleansing the body and satisfying the body blurred into warm steam and slippery stone floors. And the obscure tidbit: Romans loved using oils, not soap, to clean themselves. After exercising or sweating in the hot room, they rubbed olive oil across their skin and then scraped it off with a curved tool called a strigil. Sometimes the scrapings were collected and repurposed for medicinal ointments. Yes, you heard that correctly. People rubbed other people's oily sweat mix on wounds, believing it carried healing properties. Suddenly, your bottle of lavender body wash doesn't sound so bad. Historians still debate whether the baths were truly egalitarian, whether slaves and the poor could access the same facilities as the wealthy. Some evidence suggests yes, others no. What's certain is that the baths were designed to impress. Mosaics, fountains, statues, even gardens attached to some of the grander complexes. As you walk through, you see men reclining on benches, servants offering towels, children splashing too loudly while their parents scold them. And then there are the whispered conversations, the deals struck, the rumors traded, the flirtations disguised as casual banter. If walls had ears, the baths would be deafened. One pool steams, another cools, another lies still in silence. You wander between them, feeling the press of heat on your skin, the damp marble underfoot. The air smells of smoke, oil, sweat, and something faintly floral from the oils poured into the pools. As night falls, lamps flicker in niches along the walls, their light golden against the mosaics. The voices soften, people drifting out into the streets again. The baths empty, but the echoes remain, as though Rome itself is still murmuring, still restless, still unwilling to sleep. And you, wrapped in the warmth of the evening, feel it too. The city humming beneath your feet, promising more secrets tomorrow. The streets of Rome after dark have a different rhythm. By day, you dodged carts, beggars, and senators hurrying along in their togas. By night, the city exhales. Torches sputter in iron brackets, throwing long shadows across uneven stone. The air smells of smoke, cooking meat, and just a hint of sewage that somehow manages to feel eternal. You follow the sound of pipes and laughter toward an open courtyard where a gathering is already underway. This isn't a formal banquet. It's more like a neighborhood revel, a feast spilling into the streets. Wine flows freely, and with it, inhibitions. Romans were very good at turning even casual evenings into something halfway between a drinking contest and a stage play. Your historical fact here. Roman drinking culture was famously tied to poetry, music, and body entertainment. The poet Ovid, for instance, wrote an entire guidebook, the Ars Amatoria, on how to flirt and seduce at parties. It was so cheeky that later emperors actually banned it, blaming Ovid for corrupting Roman morals. Imagine being the guy blamed for ruining an entire empire's virtue because you wrote a spicy advice column in verse. Now, for the obscure tidbit. Some Romans believed that hiccups at a drinking party were a sign that Venus, the goddess of love, had entered the room. To cure them, one guest might suddenly kiss another. Surprise smooches as ancient medicine. That means your average hiccup could either lead to laughter or scandal, depending on who was closest. Historians still debate how widespread these practices were. Were they the norm for the middle-class Roman, or just elite eccentricities written about for amusement? Like many things in Rome, the truth is probably somewhere in between. As you watch, someone begins reciting verses, half serious, half mockery, while another plays a lyre. Two men start a mock duel with wooden cups as swords, spilling wine everywhere. A woman laughs so hard she drops her wreath of ivy, which a passing goat promptly eats. Yes, someone actually brought a goat to the party. Rome didn't always have guest lists. You notice, too, the blurred line between performance and reality. A slave girl is made to dance in the middle, her movements both admired and mocked. A boy recites dirty limericks he probably only half understands. You can't help but feel how layered Roman life was. Pleasure, cruelty, humor, and excess all woven into the same tapestry. The laughter grows louder as the night deepens. You retreat into the shadows, the mosaic of voices washing over you. Rome, you realize, never really needed Netflix. It had itself, and that was enough. The next day dawns warm, and you find yourself wandering toward the temples, the beating spiritual heart of Rome. But don't imagine solemn silence and prayer. The gods of Rome were social creatures, and their rituals often mixed devotion with spectacle. At the Temple of Venus, worshippers gather to lay flowers, burn incense, and whisper prayers about love, fertility, and all the messy matters of the heart. You see women tying ribbons to altars, men offering coins, and, yes, symbols of intimacy offered as gifts. Here's your major fact. The cult of Venus and other fertility deities often encouraged offerings that today might raise eyebrows. Archaeological evidence shows small terracotta figurines shaped like body parts. Everything from arms and legs to very specific reproductive organs, left at shrines in hopes of divine blessing. Yes, someone once prayed for a better love life by plopping a clay phallus in front of a statue. And here's your obscure tidbit. In certain festivals, Roman women carried out rituals involving cakes shaped like, well, let's just say they weren't cupcakes. These edible offerings were meant to honor fertility gods. Picture an entire bakery display that looks more like an anatomy lesson than dessert. Historians still debate whether these rituals were universally accepted or if they existed mainly in certain regions or among cult devotees. It's possible that what shocks us today was, for them, just another Tuesday. You walk further, and the rituals grow stranger. At one shrine, a priest sprinkles wine onto a statue, chanting verses in a sing-song tone. At another, women gather in a circle, laughing as they toss flower petals and whisper jokes that make the younger girls blush. Religion here is not a solemn Sunday service. It's equal parts carnival, superstition, and community therapy session. And then there's the theater of it all. Priests in flowing robes parade through the streets with sacred objects hidden in baskets. Everyone pretends not to know what's inside, though the giggles suggest otherwise. Public worship blends seamlessly with public entertainment, like a citywide variety show dedicated to keeping the gods amused. As you leave the temple, you glance back at the steps, strewn with petals, wax, coins, and more offerings than you care to describe in polite company. Rome, you realize, had a talent for turning even spirituality into spectacle. The city hums again around you, and you know the deeper you walk into it, the stranger its secrets will become. The marble halls of imperial Rome echo with a different kind of intimacy, one woven with power, politics, and scandal. You step carefully across polished stone floors, the air cool and heavy with incense. Gold-framed frescoes line the walls, depicting gods, battles, and a few mythological scenes that are frankly more risque than heroic. It seems the Romans couldn't resist slipping a little bedroom drama into their art. In this space, pleasure isn't just about indulgence, it's about leverage. Emperors and elites treated desire as another weapon in the arsenal of power. You hear whispers of Caligula, whose private banquets became infamous for blending politics with performance. Picture senators, their dignity crumbling as they sit through feasts where morality was less of a rule and more of a suggestion. Here's your historical fact. Emperor Tiberius, Caligula's predecessor, retreated to Capri later in life and filled his villa with what sources describe as obscene amusements. Ancient historians claimed his gardens and grottos became playgrounds for indulgence, though how much of that is gossip versus reality is still hotly debated. But the rumor alone was enough to stain his name permanently. And here's your obscure tidbit. Some Roman elites were said to train exotic animals. Yes, animals, to perform in ways that blurred the line between spectacle and something more suggestive. Whether these tales were truth or exaggerated slander, they paint a vivid picture of how far gossip could stretch in the empire. Historians still debate whether such stories reflect real events or political smear campaigns. After all, Roman authors were masters of character assassination, and scandal made better reading than facts. As you linger, you realize that what shocks us today may have been carefully crafted slander in their time, a way to topple emperors with whispers rather than swords. Still, the very fact that such tales existed says much about Rome's reputation. Excess wasn't just tolerated. It was expected. At the far end of the hall, a door creaks open. You glimpse a courtyard where nobles lounge under vines heavy with grapes. Their laughter is sharp, tinged with mockery, as they trade stories of who has been seen with whom. It strikes you that gossip was Rome's true empire, an unstoppable force that bound even emperors in its grip. You slip back into the corridor, the echoes of their laughter following you like ghosts. Step into the Roman baths, and suddenly you're in the city's true melting pot. Imagine a grand hall filled with steam, mosaics glittering under torchlight, and bodies. So many bodies, lounging, gossiping, and sweating together. Hygiene, for the Romans, was less about soap and more about social life. Here's your major fact. The baths were daily hubs where men and women, sometimes separated, sometimes not, gathered not only to clean but to network. Deals were struck, romances sparked, and yes, plenty of questionable activities took place behind the veil of steam. A bathhouse wasn't just about rinsing dirt. It was about rinsing boredom. Now for your obscure tidbit. Roman bathers used a tool called a strigil, a curved metal scraper, to remove oil, dirt, and sweat. It was less refreshing shower and more DIY exfoliation with medieval cutlery. Picture someone scraping grime off themselves and handing the residue to a servant, who sometimes collected it to sell as skin treatments. Congratulations, you've just discovered the Roman version of luxury skincare. Historians still debate how mixed-gender bathing really was. Some sources insist it was common, others argue it was scandalous, and still others hint it depended entirely on the time, place, or emperor's mood. The uncertainty itself feels fitting for a society that loved bending rules when it suited them. As you wander, you notice the rhythms of the space. Men leaning against marble benches, gesturing wildly as they argue politics. Women whispering behind fans, their laughter echoing through the steam. Children darting between pools while older men grumble about the noise. All of Rome, in miniature, reflected in the water's surface, and beneath it all a layer of indulgence. Behind the public pools, private rooms beckon with promises of massages, perfumes, and companionship, services that blur the line between relaxation and recreation. As you lean against a cool stone wall, you realize this place says more about Rome than its monuments ever could. The baths weren't just about washing. They were about belonging to a society where the line between public and private life was thinner than steam itself. The sounds of laughter, splashing, and whispered deals fade into the haze. Rome, once again, reveals itself not in marble statues but in the sweat and chatter of ordinary days. You step out of the steamy baths into the bright Roman streets, only to find yourself swept into the chaos of a festival. The air hums with music, flutes, drums, and the occasional drunken shout that's less melody and more misplaced enthusiasm. You've stumbled into the Saturnalia, Rome's most infamous holiday, where everything is turned upside down. The streets are crowded with garlands, candles, and people in ridiculous costumes. Slaves sit at tables while their masters serve them wine, laughing at the topsy-turvy arrangement. For a week, the ordinary rules of society dissolve into something closer to organized chaos. It's Rome's version of a holiday break, except with more nudity and fewer wholesome family activities. Here's your major historical fact. Saturnalia was celebrated in December, and it's widely considered one of the ancestors of modern Christmas traditions. Gift-giving, feasting, and candlelight? Thank the Romans. Though in fairness, their version was a lot rowdier and probably wouldn't pass modern HR policies. Now for your obscure tidbit. During Saturnalia, people wore pileus caps, soft, cone-shaped hats usually reserved for freed slaves. For this brief period, everyone symbolically became free. Imagine an entire city wearing silly felt hats while pretending to be liberated. It's equal parts festive and theatrical cosplay. Historians still debate how far the role reversals went. Some argue slaves could mock their masters openly. Others think it was more symbolic, with everyone laughing but still mindful of who held the whips the next morning. The truth may have shifted from one household to the next, like a family gathering where no one agrees on the rules of the board game. As the night deepens, you notice wine spilling freely, dice rolling across tables, and kisses exchanged in alleyways. Saturnalia was, in many ways, Rome at its most honest, playful, indulgent, and eager to suspend the weight of seriousness. You walk through the festival, the flicker of torchlight painting shadows on walls, and for a moment, the empire feels like a carnival, vivid, alive, and teetering on the edge of chaos. From Saturnalia's misrule, you slip into another celebration, one with sharper edges. The festival of Floralia bursts into bloom in the spring, and while Saturnalia leaned into feasting and mockery, Floralia leaned into, well, other appetites. The city overflows with flowers, their petals scattered across marble steps, their scents almost overwhelming. Dancers fill the stage, garlands wrapped around their hair, their movements teasing, exaggerated, and deliberately suggestive. Floralia wasn't a quiet prayer to the goddess Flora. It was an unapologetic display of fertility and pleasure. Here's your historical fact. Floralia began as a religious festival dedicated to Flora, the goddess of flowers and fertility. By the late Republic, though, it had transformed into something more carnival-like, with theater performances notorious for their erotic themes. It was less about tending the garden and more about celebrating what grows in it. And here's your obscure tidbit. Ancient sources describe performances where actresses occasionally stripped on stage, scandalizing conservative senators. Sometimes, rabbits and hares, symbols of fertility, were released into the crowd, sending people scrambling through petals and laughter to catch them. It was less theater, more chaotic street party with animals. Historians still debate whether Floralia was genuinely embraced by all Romans or if the elite merely tolerated it while sneering from their balconies. Was it a festival for everyone, or a guilty pleasure they pretended to frown upon? The uncertainty adds to its allure. As you watch, you notice how the crowd shifts. Merchants laugh loudly with their neighbors, matrons blush behind their veils, children chase the unlucky rabbits, and somewhere in the back, a philosopher rolls his eyes while definitely not leaving. There's a looseness to it all, a reminder that Romans, despite their marble monuments and rigid laws, loved moments where they could breathe, laugh, and give in to desire without the weight of the empire pressing down. The pedals crunch softly under your sandals as the music rises, and you realize festivals like these weren't just distractions. They were release valves, necessary bursts of chaos that kept the empire from suffocating under its own order. You find yourself ushered into a grand domus, the kind with mosaic floors that catch lamplight like tiny constellations. The air is thick with roasted meats, honeyed wine, and the unmistakable perfume of too many guests wearing too much imported oil. Tonight, you're at a Roman banquet, not just a dinner, but a full-scale performance of wealth, appetite, and endurance. Slaves weave through the triclinium, balancing silver trays piled high with dishes that feel more like curiosities than food. Stuffed dormice, glazed with honey and poppy seeds. Flamingo tongues, prized for their delicate flavor. And fish sauces so pungent they could probably double as household cleaner. Romans didn't just eat. They staged meals as spectacles, daring guests to marvel and gag at the same time. Your major historical fact here: banquets were central to Roman social life. They weren't only about food, but about politics, influence, and cementing status. A wealthy patron invited guests strategically, using the meal to display generosity and power. It was networking, but with more reclining and fewer LinkedIn requests. Obscure tidbit? In some banquets, hosts introduced entertainments that would raise eyebrows even in Vegas. Dancers, acrobats, poets, and occasionally gladiatorial demonstrations, though usually scaled down so no one lost a limb near the salad. One eccentric emperor allegedly released tame leopards into the dining hall for ambience. Nothing says bon appetit quite like checking your wine cup for whiskers. Historians still debate whether the most outrageous descriptions of Roman feasts were exaggerated moral tales or actual menus. Ancient writers loved mocking decadent elites, and sometimes it's hard to tell whether a dish was really served or just invented as a satirical metaphor. Imagine trying to explain modern fast food menus to future scholars. They might think double bacon cheeseburger was a parody too. You recline among the guests, propped on cushions, watching as the courses roll out like waves of excess. Conversations drift from politics to gossip, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the occasional belch that no one bothers to excuse. This isn't dinner. It's theater, and every guest is both audience and actor. By the end, the floor glitters with bones, shells, and petals, as though the very house has bloomed and died in a single night. The lamps burn low, and the wine jars stand empty, but the empire feels no smaller for the waste. If the banquet was performance, then the after-party is pure improvisation. The night spills into quieter courtyards where the air is cool, the moonlight silver against columns, and the wine still flows though the jugs grow lighter. Here, whispers turn into caresses, and the shadows stretch long with secrets. Rome had a reputation for appetite, but desire was rarely separated from spectacle. Affairs blossomed in the corners of these feasts, behind heavy curtains or in gardens perfumed with roses. A glance across the table could turn into a clandestine meeting under the stars. And sometimes discretion was optional. Historical fact: upper-class Roman women did attend banquets, despite conservative voices complaining about it. While early traditions kept them away, by the imperial period, women of status reclined and drank alongside men. This scandalized moralists who thought women sipping wine was the first step toward total societal collapse. Spoiler: society did collapse, but much later and probably not because of the wine. Obscure tidbit: Romans sometimes mixed aphrodisiacs into the banquet. Odd recipes survive: satyrion, a type of orchid root, peppercorns, and even exotic ingredients like lizard ashes. Did they work? Probably not, though perhaps the belief alone was enough. Historians note that if someone offers you a special potion in a cup at a Roman feast, it's best to sip cautiously. Historians still debate the extent of sexual freedoms at banquets. Some describe them as wild orgiastic revelries. Others insist that while flirtation was common, most gatherings weren't constant bacchanals. Perhaps, like modern parties, it depended on the host, the guest list, and how much wine survived until midnight. The night deepens. You wander through the garden, hearing laughter mingled with the rustle of leaves. Somewhere, a musician plays a soft tune, the flute's notes curling like smoke into the sky. You pass a statue of Venus half hidden in ivy, her marble face gazing eternally at the same lovers who, century after century, sneak through these same paths. And though Rome is marble and empire and steel, it is also flesh, longing, and the gentle hush of secrets traded in the moonlight. You leave the gardens behind and step into narrower streets where the lamps burn dimmer, the laughter more ragged, and the shadows cling closer to the walls. This is the underbelly of Rome, its brothels, bathhouses, and backrooms. Here, desire is not polished with wine and marble, but offered as plainly as bread at a stall. The entrance to a brothel hardly hides what goes on inside. Small rooms line a narrow corridor, each with a thin curtain or wooden door, and sometimes a painting above the entrance, a visual advertisement of the services within. These frescoes, crude and vibrant, were the ancient version of shop signs. No ambiguity, no guessing. A passerby would know instantly what they could expect behind each threshold. Your major historical fact here: Roman brothels, known as lupinaria, literally wolf dens, were legal, taxed, and regulated. Prostitutes were often required to register with authorities and wear specific garments so their profession was unmistakable. It was, in essence, a bureaucratic system of desire. Rome didn't just tolerate this industry, it profited from it. An obscure tidbit surfaces. Some brothels issued tokens or little bronze coins called spintrii, engraved with explicit scenes. Scholars think these may have been used as a kind of prepaid ticket for services. Imagine fumbling at a counter, slipping over a coin etched with two stick figures doing something the shopkeeper already knows. Subtlety was not the Roman way. Historians still debate whether the spintrii were actually for brothel use or simply gambling tokens with bawdy decoration. The ambiguity lingers like the scent of old wine, faint but persistent. Inside, the air is heavy with oil lamps and cheap perfume. Wooden beds creak behind thin walls. The sounds are not elegant, not refined, but raw, transactional, and sometimes oddly mundane. For the people here, this isn't spectacle, it's survival. Many were enslaved, others forced into this work through poverty. The empire's hunger for pleasure rested on their backs, and rarely did their stories escape these walls. You step back into the street, the noise fading behind you. Rome, always contradictory, can celebrate virtue on marble altars while conducting business of flesh a few alleys away. The empire is nothing if not adaptable. From the brothels you drift toward the bathhouses, the thermae. Here, hygiene and hedonism blur until it's difficult to tell whether Romans came to wash, to socialize, or to indulge in something else entirely. The building rises like a palace. Grand arches, steaming pools, painted walls, and rows of marble benches. You pass through the apoditerium, the changing room, where attendants guard the clothes of bathers. The noise is overwhelming. Conversations bounce against the tiles, merchants argue, poets recite, lovers whisper. If the forum was Rome's head, the baths were its beating heart. Your major historical fact: public baths were not just for cleaning. They were community hubs where people of nearly all social classes mingled, soaking in hot pools, plunging into cold ones, exercising, gambling, and even discussing politics. Some emperors built vast complexes, able to accommodate thousands, with libraries, gardens, and lecture halls attached. Obscure tidbit: some Romans believed oiling and scraping the skin with a strigil, a curved metal tool, not only cleaned the body but enhanced sensual pleasure. Certain oils were scented with saffron or exotic herbs, making the bathhouse smell like a mix of gym locker and perfume shop. And yes, some patrons collected the oily scrapings from famous athletes and sold them as miracle potions. Imagine buying a celebrity's sweat today, bottled as luxury skincare. Historians still debate the extent of sexual activity in the baths. Ancient writers hint at licentious behavior, especially in the darker corners, but it's unclear how common or accepted these activities were. The line between rumor and reality blurs in the steam. You sit on the edge of a hot pool, toes sinking into the warmth, listening to voices echo off the domed ceiling. A man nearby brags about his latest political scheme, while another debates the quality of imported oysters. Behind you, a flute player sends lilting notes across the water. As the steam rises, it's easy to forget the streets, the brothels, even the banquets. The bath is its own world, suspended between body and soul, between ritual and indulgence. Rome, in its endless contradictions, manages to turn even a bath into both a civic duty and a whispered invitation. You leave the bathhouse with its damp heat clinging to your skin and step into the cooler Roman evening. The streets hum with voices and torchlight flickers against stone walls. Tonight, the topic is not the chaos of brothels or the chatter of bathhouses, but the supposed respectability of Roman marriage. Respectability, of course, being a very elastic concept in Rome. Marriage here is not about romance. It is a contract, an alliance, a calculation of wealth, family name, and political advantage. The bride may be 14, the groom perhaps twice her age, and love is rarely the point. You walk into a villa where preparations for a wedding feast are underway. Slaves arrange garlands of flowers, musicians tune instruments, and a platter of roasted dormice waits to be devoured. Your major historical fact: Roman marriages, connubium, were legal arrangements overseen by family patriarchs. Women were often married off young, with little say in the matter, and their primary role was to bear legitimate heirs. Divorce, however, was surprisingly easy. Either partner could initiate it, and remarriage was common, even expected. An obscure tidbit emerges from the flicker of lamplight. Brides on their wedding night carried a small torch from the hearth of their father's house to their husbands, symbolizing the transfer of domestic fire and loyalty. Sometimes, this ritual was done with more ceremony than enthusiasm, considering the bride had just been uprooted from everything familiar. Historians still debate how much genuine affection existed in these arranged marriages. Ancient letters and poems suggest that while many unions were cold, others did grow into partnerships of affection, and some even hint at tender love. But tenderness was not the point. The empire cared for heirs, not heartstrings. In this villa, the bride wears a bright orange veil, a flammeum, glowing like firelight. The guests toast with wine, laughing at crude jokes, as if distracting themselves from the fact that this new household was built on duty. Outside, neighbors peek over the wall, judging, whispering, perhaps remembering their own weddings. Equally strategic, equally practical. And yet, amid all this, the contradictions of Rome surface once more. While marriage was bound in rules, love and lust spilled freely into other corners. Husbands took mistresses, wives sometimes lovers, and society turned a blind eye, as long as appearances were maintained. Respectability was a performance one Rome perfected. As you drift away from the villa, the sounds of the wedding fade into the night. Down another street, quieter now, you stumble upon the reality beneath the polished surface. The double standards of intimacy in Rome. Here, men brag openly of their conquests, their masculinity measured not by fidelity but by their ability to dominate in bed, in politics, in war. For women, however, the rules were iron. A married woman caught in adultery could be divorced, disgraced, even exiled. Her husband, on the other hand, could visit brothels, keep concubines, or seduce slaves without serious consequence. Your major historical fact. Roman law, specifically under Augustus, even codified sexual morality. His Lex Julia laws criminalized adultery, but the punishments fell far more heavily on women than men. These laws were intended to restore virtue, though in practice they mostly preserved male authority. The obscure tidbit lies in the shadows. Some Roman women, eager for freedom, disguised themselves in wigs and cloaks to sneak into gladiatorial games or even into the less respectable taverns. A scandalous story tells of noblewomen attending masked parties in the guise of slaves, shedding the weight of respectability for a night of anonymity. Whether these tales were moral warnings or gleeful gossip, it's hard to say. Historians still debate just how restrictive Roman gender roles truly were. While elite women were hemmed in by social expectations, inscriptions and tombstones suggest that many working women, midwives, merchants, craftswomen, led more practical, independent lives than literary sources imply. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the middle, blurred between law and lived reality. You pause by a marble fountain, listening to water spill in rhythmic trickles, almost like a lullaby. Around you, the city is quieter, though not silent. A man stumbles out of a tavern, laughing too loudly. A woman pulls her shawl tighter and walks briskly home. Respectability and indulgence, side by side, each pretending not to see the other. Rome's greatest trick is this, to balance its obsession with order against its hunger for chaos. Marriage contracts, moral laws, public virtue, all performed on stage. And behind the curtains, a world as messy, contradictory, and very human as any you know today. You wake to the sound of drums. At first, it's a faint beat, echoing down stone streets, but then the rhythm swells, and the city begins to hum. Today is no ordinary day, it's a festival day. Rome loved its rituals, and none more than those that blurred the lines between respectable religion and outrageous indulgence. You follow the crowd until you stumble upon the festival of Lupercalia, an ancient rite that the Romans swore kept away infertility and bad luck. Priests, known as Luperci, run half-naked through the streets, smeared with the blood of sacrificed goats. They carry strips of goat hide, februa, and slap them playfully against women who willingly stretch out their hands, even their stomachs, believing the touch will bring fertility and safe childbirth. Your major historical fact here: Lupercalia was celebrated every February 15th in honor of the god Faunus, the Roman version of Pan, and also tied to the myth of Romulus and Remus. It was a mix of purification ritual, fertility rite, and rowdy party. The obscure tidbit is almost too charming not to mention. During Lupercalia, names of young men and women were sometimes drawn by lottery to form couples for the festival, and sometimes beyond. A sort of Roman Valentine's Day, only with more goats and less chocolate. Historians still debate whether the erotic elements of the festival were as wild as later Christian commentators claimed. Some argue that much of what we imagine about Lupercalia's excesses was exaggerated to justify its suppression when Christianity took hold. But as you watch the crowd laughing, dancing, and singing bawdy songs, you sense that Rome didn't really need exaggeration. it was quite capable of making the scandalous look festive all on its own. The air is thick with torches and wine. Young men chase one another down alleys, garlands slipping from their hair, while matrons, usually dignified, giggle like schoolgirls as the goat-hide lashes graze their arms. You find yourself laughing too, though the humor is drowsy, softened by the dreamlike sense that this city, so rigid in its rules, knew how to unravel them when it wished. Rome's contradictions once again shimmer before you. A society obsessed with law, order, and virtue, yet unashamedly devoted to festivals that sanctioned chaos. The city breathes with both discipline and desire, never quite letting one smother the other. If Lupercalia was Rome's cheeky fertility ritual, Saturnalia was its full-blown carnival of reversal. You wander now into December, when the festival of Saturn is in full swing, and the city feels upside down. In Saturnalia, masters serve their slaves, gambling is allowed, and drinking flows without restraint. Everyone dons colorful caps called pilae, symbolizing freedom, and the air is electric with a kind of giddy anarchy. Even the stern Roman senators loosen their togas, laughing too loudly, pretending, just for a few days, that hierarchy doesn't matter. Your major historical fact. Saturnalia, celebrated in mid-December, was one of the most popular Roman festivals. It honored Saturn, the god of agriculture, and was marked by gift-giving, feasting, and a suspension of normal social rules. Here's your obscure tidbit. Part of the tradition was to appoint a mock king, the Saturnalian princeps, often a slave or someone of low status, who gave silly orders that had to be obeyed. Imagine your boss having to dance like a chicken because the office intern said so. Romans found this inversion hilarious, and perhaps a necessary release valve in their rigidly stratified world. Historians still debate whether Saturnalia influenced later Christmas traditions. The timing, the gift-giving, even the feasting seem suspiciously familiar. Some argue the parallels are coincidental. Others say Christianity absorbed elements to ease the cultural transition. Either way, the festive glow of Saturnalia lingers in the winter holidays we know today. As you stroll through torchlit streets, you pass tables overflowing with figs, nuts, and honey cakes. A senator, tipsy, sings an off-key tune while a slave claps in delight. Children dart between tables, sticky with sweets. For once, everyone seems caught in the same delirious joy. And yet, beneath the merriment, you sense the Romans understood this was temporary. Tomorrow, masters would reclaim their power, slaves would return to obedience, and senators would again wear their stern expressions. Saturnalia was a performance, but an important one. It reminded Rome that even the mightiest empire needed moments of release. The city seems to sigh as you wander through it, torchlight flickering on marble columns, laughter echoing like lullabies. Respectable or scandalous, disciplined or chaotic, Rome holds all of it together, an empire both magnificent and messy. You step into a quieter courtyard now, away from the noise of festivals and parades, and here the mood is different. You hear the scratch of a reed pen against wax tablets, the whisper of words half-sung, half-written. Poetry is spilling into the air, poetry of love, desire, longing, and sometimes things far less noble. Rome was a place where poets were adored and scorned in equal measure. Some, like Ovid, built entire careers out of teasing society's contradictions. You imagine sitting beside him as he crafts his Ars Amatoria, a manual of love that reads more like a tongue-in-cheek guidebook to seduction. His verses dance between advice on wooing and satire, turning romance into a kind of playful performance. Here's your major historical fact. Ovid's Ars Amatoria was so controversial that Augustus, Rome's first emperor, exiled him to the Black Sea in 8 CE. Officially, the reasons were a poem and a mistake. Scholars still wonder if his writings about love were simply too scandalous, or if Ovid had stumbled into some political intrigue. Now your obscure tidbit. Roman women sometimes carried love charms in tiny lead scrolls tucked into jewelry, inscribed with magical words. These were meant to bind a lover's heart or stir passion where none existed. Imagine slipping a cursed love note into someone's inbox and hoping the algorithm makes them obsessed with you. Historians still debate just how seriously Romans took this mingling of poetry, magic, and love. Were the charms symbolic, or did people genuinely fear their power? Whatever the truth, its clear desire was not just physical. It was laced with superstition, humor, and ritual. As you linger in the courtyard, a slave girl sweeps flower petals while her mistress gazes wistfully at a wax tablet. A lover's note, perhaps carefully etched, or maybe a playful line of verse. You sense that in Rome, love was rarely private. It was performed, sung, and whispered across the city like gossip that could not be contained. There's a warmth here, but also irony. For every poem of devotion, there's another mocking lovers for being fools. Rome understood desire not as a pure flame but as a flickering candle, bright, but always vulnerable to being snuffed out by laughter, law, or fate. The next room is darker, quieter, and heavier with secrecy. If section 21 was about poetry and laughter, here you're stepping into Rome's shadows. You hear hushed whispers, the rustle of cloaks, the closing of doors. Romans had a taste for private games, intimate, hidden, sometimes indulgent, sometimes cruel. You wander through a domus where painted walls tell tales more explicit than polite company might allow. Erotic frescoes, especially from places like Pompeii, show how Romans both celebrated and normalized the physical side of love. They didn't blush easily, at least not in their art. Your major historical fact: archaeological excavations at Pompeii and Herculaneum revealed entire collections of erotic art, from wall paintings to small statues, so abundant that early archaeologists locked them away in a secret cabinet in Naples for centuries. The obscure tidbit: certain Roman bathhouses had little bronze tokens called spintrii, coins with erotic imagery. Scholars argue over whether they were used as entry tickets, conversation pieces, or something more risque. The tokens themselves are beautifully made, though you can imagine a Roman pocket jingling with coins that would make even a modern bystander raise an eyebrow. Historians still debate how widespread such indulgences really were. Were these artworks and objects commonplace, or limited to specific classes and districts? The evidence is tantalizing but incomplete, leaving us to drift between possibility and certainty. You walk through the frescoed room slowly, the painted figures watching you with their fixed ancient smiles. Outside, you hear footsteps of revelers, but in here, the space is hushed. Intimacy in Rome could be a public performance, but it could also be this: hidden rooms, coded objects, tokens exchanged with a knowing glance. And here, too, you find irony. A culture that prized order, family lineage, and civic duty also carved out spaces where desire could be unruly, playful, or strange. The empire was vast, but so too were the landscapes of human longing it contained. As you leave the room, the torchlight flickers on the walls, casting long shadows. The laughter outside feels far away now. You walk slowly, as though carrying secrets with you, even if they're not your own. You step into a grander hall now, not the intimate courtyards or hidden chambers you've been passing through. The marble floors are cool beneath your feet, and high above, light filters through open beams. Here, the theme is not private desire, but desire tangled with politics. In Rome, love and lust were never just personal. They could topple reputations, shape alliances, or ruin entire families. You hear the clink of goblets and the murmur of senators at a feast, their togas heavy with dignity, at least in theory. Behind the stage of formality, scandal whispers like smoke. Lovers and mistresses are not absent from these banquets. They hover like ghosts, influencing decisions as surely as any speech in the forum. Here's your major historical fact. Julius Caesar's affair with Cleopatra was not only legendary but also political theater. The union produced a son, Caesar Ion, and cemented Cleopatra's image in Rome as both a seductress and a threat. The Roman Senate fretted that Caesar might abandon Rome for Alexandria and crown himself king, all because of one queen's influence. Your obscure tidbit. Roman wives of senators sometimes hired slaves to spy on their husbands during banquets, slipping them coded notes in food trays. Imagine discovering your betrayal not from an overheard whisper, but from a roasted pheasant delivered with a warning carved into the bread beside it. Historians still debate whether women like Cleopatra wielded genuine power through seduction, or whether Roman writers exaggerated these stories to fit their anxieties about foreign queens and feminine influence. The truth may be both. Myth woven into politics, rumor amplified until it feels like fact. You wander through the banquet, listening. A senator boasts too loudly. Another smirks as he leans in to whisper scandal about his rival's latest affair. The wine flows freely, but beneath the laughter lies tension. For Romans, love was not just a private indulgence. It was a weapon, a risk, a gamble that could reshape history. You leave the hall, hearing the laughter fade behind you. Out in the cool air, you can't help but think. Rome may have mastered aqueducts and armies, but it never solved the problem of gossip. Now the streets grow quieter again, and you feel the weight of twilight pressing on the city. Shadows stretch across stone roads, and oil lamps flicker in doorways. You're moving toward the end of this wandering journey, and with it comes reflection. Here, desire feels less like scandal and more like memory, traces of lives once lived. You pass by small shrines where lovers once carved names, like graffiti that centuries could not entirely erase. Someone whispered here once, and someone else answered, and though their voices are gone, the stone still remembers. Your major historical fact. Inscriptions from Pompeii's walls reveal not only political slogans but also fragments of everyday intimacy. One graffito reads simply, Secundus loves Iris. Another sighs, Successus loves the girl, but she does not care. Desire, in all its messy, unfiltered humanity, is scratched into plaster for eternity. Your obscure tidbit. Romans sometimes buried little lead curse tablets, depictions near tombs, inscribed with pleas for gods or spirits to interfere in matters of love. Bind his tongue, one might say, or make her burn with longing. Imagine filing a celestial complaint form, folded up and slipped under the cosmic doormat. Historians still debate whether such graffiti and curses were playful exaggerations or deeply felt expressions. Were they jokes shared among friends, or cries of longing etched in desperation? The line between humor and heartache is always thin. You stand still for a moment, listening to the city breathe. Somewhere a dog barks, and in the distance, the sound of a lute drifts across the rooftops. The Romans you've followed through desire's many twists and turns feel suddenly closer. Their practices may have been strange, their rituals odd, their indulgences shocking. Yet beneath it all lies something universal, the restless, unending search for connection. As the oil lamps dim and the night deepens, you realize Rome's story of desire is not one tale, but many. A chorus of voices, poets, queens, slaves, senators, all tangled in longing. And with that, you begin to slow your steps. The city is quiet now, and the streets you've walked before are fading into shadow. This is where your journey prepares to close, though the echoes will linger a while longer. The streets of Rome are hushed now. The laughter from the taverns, the bickering from the market stalls, even the sly whispers from dim-lit doorways, All of it has softened, folded away into the embrace of night. You walk slower here, your footsteps barely tapping the worn stones. The city, so loud with passion and scandal, is finally at rest. You pass under an arch where ivy has begun to creep, curling into cracks that no emperor bothered to repair. The stones breathe coolness, and the silence feels like water washing over you. For once, you are not surrounded by gossip or laughter or the smell of oil lamps, only the quiet and your own steady breath. Remember the street you walked past earlier, the one littered with broken amphorae and whispered rumors? It looks different now. Softer, almost gentle, with shadows lying across the cobblestones like blankets. In the silence, it's hard to believe the same road once carried armies, lovers, and scandals. Tonight, it's simply a path home. A dog curls up by a doorway, twitching in sleep. A cat slips across your path, tail lifted high, moving like smoke. Above, the sky opens wide. You see stars scattered like faint grains of salt across velvet black. For a moment, you imagine Roman centuries ago, lying awake under this same sky, perhaps restless, perhaps whispering, perhaps searching for sleep the way you are now. Here is your final historical fact. Ancient Romans believed in Somnus, the god of sleep, who drifted through the night on soft wings, carrying rest into tired hearts. Some placed small offerings by their beds, little garlands, a sip of wine, to invite his gentle visit. And your final curious tidbit. Some Romans used poppy seeds soaked in wine as a crude sleep aid, though whether it brought peaceful dreams or muddled visions is anyone's guess. Historians still debate how widespread such practices really were, but the idea of reaching for a shortcut to sleep feels timeless, doesn't it? You linger by a fountain, its trickling water soft as a lullaby. The city exhales around you, and so too can you. Now let yourself loosen. Imagine the heavy stone walls of Rome fading into the distance. Imagine the marble roads falling quiet, and let the centuries fold gently shut. The noise, the scandal, the desire, all of it is behind you. What remains is only stillness. So close your eyes, breathe deeper, feel the rhythm of your own heartbeat slowing, steady and calm, like the tide pulling you into rest. The Romans are gone now, their whispers long faded, but sleep remains. It always remains. And in this hush, with history softened to silence, you are free to drift, gently, slowly, completely into rest.